Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming down to DevWeek and coming to the first session today. I know for some of you it might have been a bit of a journey to get in, particularly if you don't work in London. Notice I didn't say the city. I do know there is a difference. Welcome to Heaven or Hollywood, Build Great UX with NUI. My name is A.Randell. I'm a MCW Technologies. Here's some information about me. Contact information is on the bottom of the slide, so email address, Twitter handle, and my blog address where I will post links as well as download to the code samples of what I did here. I haven't checked with the conference. I know they'll post my slides. I'm not sure if they have a download for the content, but if they do, it'll be there too. If not, once again, it'll be on my blog. I'm an MVP who's probably focused on Visual Studio ALM, which means Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server, as well as the new Visual Studio Online. So this is somewhat of just a personal pet thing that I'm into, the whole concept of NUI and great user experience. That said, one of the things I do deal with when talking about application lifecycle management is how user experience is something that has to be built in from the beginning. Just like you don't bolt on quality after the fact, you can't bolt on user experience at the end of a project. You don't just make things pretty, you don't just make things NUI. So we will talk about that, particularly in the concept of storyboarding at the beginning. The other thing is I recently co-authored Pro ALM 2013. My wife tells me the books arrived today at the house. Technically yesterday. So if you're looking bored and have need maybe a sleeping pill, that's a book you can go out and get at your local bookseller, or of course Amazon will have it online. So what are we going to talk about? The first thing, we'll just have a brief discussion of what NUI is, make sure we're on the same page. Then we'll look at storyboarding. Then we'll look at touch in Windows 8.1. And finally, we'll spend some time with Connect for Windows. And I brought my device with me. And we'll talk about what you can do and some fun stuff. And we'll even see if maybe we get some audience participation. You know, your friend going, oh no, not me. So when we talk about natural user interface, the key thing we're talking about here is technologies that hide the interaction with the computer so that the person interacting with the human doesn't really see it or doesn't actually consider it a computer interface. Obviously, we start thinking about voice recognition, gesture, but also even touch for the average person using a computer is not considered an interface because it is a very natural experience. We make it a conceptual difference between our traditional interfaces, most notably the mouse and keyboard. The idea we think about this is that there are different constraints when working with these different types of interfaces, which means we start thinking about building this into our applications as something that has to be thought of from the very beginning and evaluated over time. Now, when we start thinking about adding NUI, we start thinking about the initial design process of an application. And one of the best ways to do this is with storyboards. When we think about what storyboards are, they're basically just a logical set of visual elements that we're using to pre-visualize some type of experience, something before it's created, right? The key thing about this is that it abstracts away the technology we're necessarily trying to use. One of the big mistakes people make as developers in modeling software systems is trying to model or prototype a system using the tools that we're actually going to use to build it. One of the biggest problems that comes from that is there's always that little bit of, oh, if I just do a little bit more, it'll show them really what we're trying to do. One of the big problems that came out of this in the 90s was with Visual Basic, because people would start to use this as a prototyping tool over C++ because you could get something out quickly. And then what happened was the business users or consumers of the application would see it and say, give me that. That's good enough, right? And we saw what happened with that, both for good and for bad. The concept of storyboarding goes all the way back to the 1930s, and Walt Disney Company and Walt Disney are giving credit with having actually formalized this process. And that was used to break down visually a proposed story. Now, one way to think about a storyboard is that it is a narrative prototype, right? It's a way of telling a story, but in a much less refined mechanism, right? Not necessarily the way it will be, but an idea of what it could be. Now, when we think about using storyboards in software design then, it's really a replacement for what we typically refer to as requirements. Now, In all cases, a storyboard won't provide you with all the data you need to build a software solution. In particular, storyboards are primarily focused on user interaction. So for NUI, that's exactly where we want to be. Now, there are going to be places where you might have to break down and use your keyboard and type out something more formal. You might have to interact with a business analyst and talk about the complexities of the application you're building, particularly when there's complex algorithms involved around, say, finance, for example, right? You're not going to express that necessarily visually. On the other hand, when we think about defining the overall flow of a system, the visual interaction or the NUI interaction is going to be where we need to break that down from the beginning, because that's going to be the entry point, the touch point, to use that term, into the system. So here's an example of a real storyboard from A Bug's Life. And you can see that it's a very rough sketch. Now, granted, for some of us, this might be a challenge to even get something like this, right? I'm more of the stick figure kind of artist at times. I can do a happy face usually, that's pretty good. But when you compare this to what the real thing is, you can see that this is just a basic sketch and breakdown. Now here's a richer breakdown from the movie Tron Legacy. Now you notice this is a little more detailed. In fact, it looks highly stylized. Okay? Once again, for the average person who isn't a designer, who doesn't have artistic skills, there's a lot that went into it. But we see the basic frame-by-frame representation, and then notice the annotations with different colored items to show things like perspective, motion, and flow. All this is done in a two-dimensional format that simply expresses the basic concept, right? The key is no one's going to pay hard-earned money to go see this at the cinema, right? This is not what they're expecting. But when you're talking about the people that have to build it, it gets the juices flowing as to how and what we're looking to build. Then, once you go further, you can evolve from a simple sketch to something highly rendered and evolved, right? Same thing with Tron, where you have very rich, almost 3D aspect. In fact, they did produce a 3D version of the film. This is what we want to get to, but we can't get there until we know where we're going. And so we're thinking about new systems and ways to interact. There's a lot of different pieces that go together into that puzzle. Now, why use storyboards? Well, at the end of the day, regardless of the process, whether you're doing a more traditional waterfall process, a more formal process, or if you're using some type of agile methodology, you still have to have some basic breakdown of telling you what you want to build, right? You have to have something that says we're going to have these pieces of data on the screen, or the user is going to provide this kind of data verbally or something, right? There's got to be a capture point to get this information. And a storyboard is very simple. The key thing here is about optimizing the requirements gathering phase, right? You may have heard paralysis by analysis, where you spend too much time overthinking it, right? There's another phrase we hear, big design up front, where we spend months doing design specifications only to find out that they're out of date because the business process has changed. Fundamentally, in the modern era, we're really, in most industries, realizing that that doesn't work, right? Agile is proving to be successful when properly executed. The problem is when we have too many of these, well, we're doing this type but, my favorite being Scrum but, right? We're doing Scrum, but we do this a little different. And if you were to get Ken Schwaber in the room, he'd basically about have a coordinator whenever you use that phrase, right? You either do Scrum or you do not do Scrum, right? Now, I don't care if you do big A, agile, robe and sandals, and you get together and you have formal ceremony about it, or if you're doing as best you can. The key is that we want to reduce the cycles between what we're thinking we're going to build and what we deliver to the user. And when it comes to NUI, it's going to be even more critical that you get something in the hands of the user, the consumer of your application or technology, to see if you're doing it right, particularly if it's new. That said, there's some things like touch where the very basic gestures are almost automatic, right? They show you children using things like iPads and Surfaces. I mean, true story at home. My children have had iPads, access to iPads for years. The benefits of having a geek father, I have this need to have the latest hardware, then I can just pass it down. It works out very well. And so both my children having been using them from the very beginning, when I got them Surface RT devices from Microsoft, I didn't have to show them anything. The biggest thing I had to spend time with them is to show them how the keyboard hooked on, and the fact that they also had, instead of a numeric password, I created picture passwords for them. Beyond that, my children knew how to do it, to the point as my son wrote his first book report using Word on his Surface, and he even figured out how to save it to SkyDrive, and his only issue was I hadn't configured a printer, so he was like, the print thing's not doing anything, Dad. What's going on? Right? My daughter, the same thing, has figured out how, unfortunately, to search YouTube and do all the other things. And by the way, the iPad's a great device, and I really love we have a lot invested in it, but it's much more of a pleasure device. The kids' services have worked out really well, particularly because I have family safety. I get a nice report. And the first report I got kind of scared me because my daughter's search history, the first word I saw was but. And I'm like, what's going on? Well, why is she searching for that? Well, it turns out it was a truncated result, and it was actually butterfly. But it was one of those fun things where the device, right, was very natural for them. I had not had to train either of them on the basic premises. The touch interface for them, contrary to a lot of adults who freaked out with Windows 8 and 8.1, is that it just works. They understand the metaphor. They understand the concepts. They immediately feel natural touching the screen. Okay? But at the same time, when you introduce that type of experience onto, say, a line of business app, that may not be immediately natural to the user. And we often have to find that right balance in those situations. Once again, agile development works better on shorter cycles. And so we think about sprints, short iterations, being able to visually storyboard something quickly in a half hour, an hour or two, as opposed to spending days typing up what's going to happen. Well, you can just see the win there pretty straightforward. And of course, there's a cliche, picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Why tell me when you can show me? Once again, it doesn't replace all types of requirement documentation, right? Algorithms will still have to be documented, right? Complex business rules need to be documented. And particularly things involving safety and making sure people don't die, I'm going to want a little more process around that, right? That picture might not do it all. But once again, if we think about in global economies and global workforces, pictures solve a lot of communication barriers, right? I read a good article in The Economist, it's probably 10 years ago now, but I still remember to this day, and it talked about how in the oil and petroleum industry, how they had standardized on what they called oil rig English, which was basically very base level English without any type of tense or complexities of grammar, right? To the point it almost sounds like pidgin English of, I go now, right? Because it can be broken down and there is less complexity in trying to discuss it. So both written documentation as well as visual science commission were kept very simple to reduce the problems you would have in people trying to translate or infer meaning. Okay? Doesn't mean the rest of the company did that, doesn't mean their annual report is done in pidgin English. But it does mean around certain areas when you're trying to mix very blue-collar workforces with a set of white-collar, more technical people interacting together around these complex oil rigs and oil refinery fields, you want things to be kept as simple as possible. So, my bias is once again to using the Microsoft tool set. There are other great tools out here. I'm just going to show you one, and that's the storyboarding feature that comes with Visual Studio 2013. If you're using the Test Professional, Premium, or Ultimate Edition, you'll have access to this tooling. Unfortunately, if you only have Pro or the free versions, that won't work. That said, there are other tools out there you can look to. It's designed to work with Team Foundation Server or Visual Studio Online in that it binds the concept of the requirements or storyboard document to the equivalent work item type in the system so that you can have overall tracking and see the evolution of a particular process. So the two core artifacts you work with is, first of all, a PowerPoint file. Microsoft sat down and they have tools like Blend. They have visual artifact creation tools out there already in their arsenal of products. Yet they looked at what would be something that would be easy to use and work across a large variety of users. And PowerPoint became their choice because just about everybody knows how to use the basics of PowerPoint. I was shocked when my daughter, who's 7, had to do her first PowerPoint presentation for school. It was on dinosaurs, thankfully nothing too complex for business systems, but fundamentally, it's something that, at least in the US, is being taught at a very early age. Okay, for better or for worse, right, depending upon your view of PowerPoint. Hopefully we're not going to have too much death by in this talk. And then there's the notion of the work item. The way it works in TFS is TFS has different types of work items. So you have bugs, tasks, and we have the notion of a requirement. Requirements can be formal requirements in the CMMI template, or in the case of the Scrum template, they're known as product backlog items. In either case, you associate the metadata to say that this is a requirement type, and this gives you additional visual representation for how you can bind your PowerPoint document to the work item in the form of a storyboard. The storyboards then can be stored on a network accessible share, a SharePoint file share, or some valid HTTP endpoint, and thus they're made available and tracked in the system. So that's pretty good stuff. So let's take a look at how you can create a storyboard and show you that you can use it for both very traditional flat user interfaces, but you can also do it for richer interfaces such as NUI. So I'm going to close my presentation file for now. And I'm using PowerPoint 2013, but this also works with the previous edition for 2010. And I'm going to go on a limb here to work with the new version when and if that shows up. That said, this does use a managed add-in for PowerPoint, so you have to be using a full version of PowerPoint, either x86 or x64. It doesn't work on OS X in the PowerPoint for Mac, and it does not work on the newly released Office for iPad. So you do need a Windows machine, and unfortunately it doesn't work on the RT device yet because they don't have an added model in RT. So you do need a proper version of Windows. All right, so all you have to do is say new, blank presentation, and I come over here and I can start with a blank page. If you've installed the appropriate version of Visual Studio, you will automatically get a storyboarding tab option on your PowerPoint toolbar. So you come over and click it. And once you do, you'll see you'll have this entire toolbar of different options related to working with storyboards. So the first thing you might want to do is change the layout of the page. And once again, they thought, what would be the simplest thing to do? We'll just provide people with the base templates. So you can come in and use a PowerPoint template, but you might think that, well, I want to represent a type of screen. So what you can do is go over here to Storyboard Shapes, and what you'll get is a task pane that will show up by default on the right. And what you'll see is right here we have a number of different options. And the first thing that's interesting is a number of different backgrounds. So I can basically represent a particular type of screen that I want to create. So for example, I can come over here and create a ribbon application. So I can bring it on here, and then I can come over here and I can change this, the size of my page. And I picked the wrong button. Apologies. Let's close that. And I did want to go to the slide size. And that is fine. No. I always forget where they hit it. It's funny, after all these years of using PowerPoint, I do find the ribbon at times to be impenetrable. Where did they go? Well, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to leave it in wide layout for now. You get the idea. You can come over here, of course, and resize it. And then from there, you can come over and say, okay, well, I want to add additional items. So I can add a calendar. Whoops. It would help if I clicked the calendar. All right, for whatever reason, the calendar doesn't want to let me select it today. There we go. All right. And if you go through here, you'll see you have a number of different items. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time here laying out a screen. That's really boring. You get the idea. You've used PowerPoint. It's a matter of basic layout and giving instruction. Now, there's a few things I can give you as tips. One thing in particular is because you have PowerPoint, you can actually show progression. And I'm going to show you a much richer representation of this. But a tip in creating this is lay out the screen as far as you can where it's fully there, and then make copies of it and then start taking things away. And what you'll get is you'll get a natural build effect as you transition between slides. And I'll show you that in a second. Now, a couple things I want to point out about this. First of all, if we look down here in the shapes, down at the bottom here, it says find more shapes online. And if you click that link, it'll open your web browser and it'll take you to the Visual Studio gallery. And in the gallery, there are a number of shapes available. You can purchase some, as well as Microsoft has a number of free ones, including sketchy shapes. I like the sketchy shapes because they have that hand-drawn look. And so all you have to do is you can download these. And so we'll click here. And we'll see this. Let's put it here. And we'll come over here and unblock the file. And once I have that file, I'll just grab that path, and then I'll come back over to PowerPoint. If I go to the storyboarding tab, deselect, there we go. And there's an option here to import shapes. Paste in that file, and now you'll notice I now have sketchy shapes on here. So I go over here and create a new slide. And I can add the sketchy web browser, okay? And get rid of that, and I can add a tablet, okay? And so you can very quickly get this different look that takes focus away from what you've drawn and more about what you're trying to express. All right. So once again, really boring watching you do this, but let's go through and let's say, well, what if I wanted to share this with my team? Well, when using Team Foundation Server or Visual Studio, let's go over here. Microsoft has reimagined the web experience. So if you haven't tried Team Foundation Server in a long time, you really should give it a look. The new web interface works on any modern web browser, OS 10, Linux. In fact, a session this afternoon I'm going to show is using it for cross-platform development. And so they've really tried to make it available to anybody. So this is just one of the sample team projects I have here called Mix. And what I can do here is take this address and come over here and save this file. Oh, let's just save it to my local directory. Here. All right. And what you're able to do is you come over here to your backlog, and you can create a new item. And once you've created a backlog item, which once again is a requirement type, you notice there's a storyboard option. And you can basically come in here and start storyboarding from here, or you can link to an existing one. Now, in this case, because I'm just connected here to my online project that doesn't have a matching SharePoint location, and I don't have a network share that's successful in this location, I can't link to it. But I could also just add it here as an attachment. So you have lots of choices on how you make this available to people. Okay? Now, the cool thing about this is product backlog item 10. I can also come over here, go to storyboard links, and notice it tells you have to put it in a shared location. All right? So one of the things we can do here is do a little cheat. So close this. So what I'm doing is I'm using the built-in administrative share. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reopen that file, only now I'm going to do it from my R drive. And now once I've done that, it's going to try and connect my Team Foundation server. And what I'm going to do here is click connect, and I'm going to pick that server. And I'll pick that team project. And I can come in here, type an ID, and there's that work item. So I can go through and link it to that. Now I'm not going to pick this one because this is my local hard drive, and that's a team project up in the cloud. But fundamentally, you get the basic concept that from either direction, I can link the storyboard project in, I can create it, and then I can track it, because now that work item is just a part of the larger TFS workflow. Okay? Now, once again, not very sexy and exciting, so let's show you something that's a little richer. I'm not going to do it over the network, I'm going to go to the local drive. And I'm going to get rid of this. Sure. Okay. So I'm just going to run it. And this is one of the best things about using PowerPoint as a storyboard format. All people need is PowerPoint. This will actually work in the web browser version or OS 10. In other words, you only need a x86 version of the storyboarding, or sorry, of PowerPoint to use the storyboarding design tools. Anybody who has a modern version of PowerPoint, though, can view it on their system. I haven't had a chance to try it on the iPad, but I'm sure it'll work there as well as anywhere else, because they're just PowerPoint files in the day. There's no code or anything else behind it. We're just using the built-in PowerPoint features. So if I run the storyboard, you'll notice that what I have here is a screen. And it has the basic layout and stuff. And as I advance, we're using basic PowerPoint animation and page advancements to simulate animation and flow. So if you didn't see it, there's a mouse pointer there, and if I hit the button, it moves. Okay? Go through here, move it again, click dashboard, and then we start flowing through different screens. And here we just use different screens on top of the same one. So you get the basic layout, little clipboard inheritance, copy and paste, and you're good to go. Well, now here's something showing a richer NUI experience. Here we have touch. So what we've done is taken some shapes, in this case a hand holding a phone, and a little bit of animation, a little bit of keyboard simulating the touch experience. Fill in the rest. We've already kind of given the hint of how to be used. Show the finger coming in to touch that. Now we'll show the swiping experience, clicking again. Now we'll do the swipe flow for the map, little pinch and zoom. And you guys get very quickly to see the idea of how touch is being expressed, yet it's a very two-dimensional flat experience. Right? So granted, there's a little more work there. You have to be careful you're not gold plating your storyboards, okay? But when you're trying to express something new, that might work very well. That said, there's other ways to do it when doing, like if you want to show connect motion, well, you can just record videos, right? There's different things to do. But that's just an example of how you can put a little bit of extra effort, make it visually compelling, etc. Now, the other thing you might notice is that we have a mix here of items. These items right here are just bitmaps, right? They've just been cut and pasted in. And in fact, if you take a look on the storyboard, there's even the ability to grab screenshots from within the storyboarding tool. Okay, so you can actually use those ways to mix and match existing systems with new designs and things you're doing. Okay? Any questions? Pretty straightforward.
I've just got one question.
Yeah.
The storyboarding design, you said you've got to have Visual Studio installed.
Yes, so the way Microsoft licenses it's a part of the Visual Studio family. The developer division creates it. So if you're thinking about for non-developer,
our business analysts don't have
right,
Visual Studio.
Yeah, so Microsoft, the way they're licensing it, they made the choice not to have a business analyst SKU. For business analysts, anyone who needs access to the richer testing tools, you buy the Test Professional SKU. It's the cheapest of the three that I mentioned. And it is, unfortunately, the lowest end way to get access to these tools. That said, it gives you all the additional licenses for working with this, the agile planning tools, gives you access to the exploratory testing tools, the web-based testing tools, et cetera, are all included as part of that. And basically, they went through evaluation with both customers, the Microsoft field, et cetera, and basically did not want to add another SKU to the list of things that you had to choose from. Yes, arguably, you would expect maybe if they only gave you, say, the storyboarding and some of the other stuff, it'd be cheaper. But it's at that point where their lowest entry point to get to TFS is a Cal that's retails $500 US. And so it's kind of like, well, at $1,500, was it worth the hassle on their end as well as for the customer? And they said no. So even though it's called Test Professional, that is the non-developer SKU to buy for anybody who wants access to these enterprise features for working with TFS, and storyboarding is one of them. All right, so we will close this, and we'll go back to my slides. Okay, so, Microsoft has taken a lot of heat for Windows 8 and Windows 8.1. That said, they are responding to the reality that form factors are changing. What's interesting, as popular as Apple is, right, Android has made huge inroads both in the phone as well as the tablet market, right? And in fact, they've evolved, right? Their initial items that created may have been considered even ugly compared to some of the sleek designs that Apple put out. If you look at some of the newer tablets put out by both Samsung and the Google Nexus line, as well as the newer versions of Android, for example, the KitKat version, they've really come a long way in the design aesthetic as well as the devices, and they've lowered the price point to make them available to more people worldwide. So Microsoft has their hands full in that they did have to bring some to the market. So I am curious, how many of you are using Windows 8? Okay, so that's good. I would say what?
With the start menu up, so I don't have to use Metro.
See,
so it doesn't really count.
I find that interesting. I find that whole thing interesting because my wife, I've tormented her by moving her to Windows 8.1 in one regard, and she's totally just fell into it no problem. She didn't really scream at me or anything. As I mentioned, my children have had no problem with it at all. I do understand there is a blocking factor. I think for a lot of people what it is everything you do at the start menu can be done with the start screen. It's just, I think for a lot of people, it's that jarring experience when it takes over, right? When you do this, and then that comes up, it just kind of freaks people out. And hey, I know a lot of people, I know even Microsoft employees that use the start menu replacement tools because of the issues they've had. In either case, I've gotten used to it. I don't find it a big problem. That said, each release keeps making it better. 8.1 made it better, and this new update 1 to 8.1 is going to add additional refinements that will hopefully make people a little happier. That said, Microsoft's committed to this setup. And that said, if you're using a regular computer like I have here, the experience is kind of in your face. It's kind of like, well, why do I want to use this? On the other hand, if you use a device like I have here, this actually has a touch screen. And so you will find, actually, if you have the touch screen available, you will use both. It's the weirdest thing to think about at first, but I naturally do it when I'm on this. In fact, I'll come back to here and find myself poking the screen. Just as much as you move around and sometimes you want a mouse because you have to do something more complex that you maybe can't do with the touch device or the nub interface like I have on my ThinkPad here. The touch is another thing to just pop your hand up and do a couple of motions. Once again, it's all about the design and have you created the gestures and mechanisms for input that lets the user really figure out what's going on. So what I need to do is I need to switch screen plugins for a second here, and we will spend a little time with touch. Actually, I made a mistake. I didn't talk through my slides. So let me tell you what I'm talking about, and then we'll come back. Now the fun thing is, will it switch back? Yes, no. Oh, wait, maybe. I would love to watch the video afterwards. Oh, come on. Oh, let's just go press the button. Oh, it's going to change by the time I get here. Well, there we go. Okay. So, bunch of different form factors. And once again, if you're trying to use Windows 8 on a traditional computer, especially a traditional desktop, I can see what's the big deal. You don't care. You start looking at some of these devices, all of which I've played with to different degrees. I have a Surface. I have Surface RT. My friend has got one of the Yogas, and the new ones that have an incredibly high definition screen if you want that really like quote unquote retina display. They are really good devices, and it really does change the way you view things. That said, typical line of business after using Excel or using Visual Studio, yeah, it's who cares? I mean, I can totally understand that. Right? We're not there where we're going to code with our hands yet with waving in the air with Visual Studio. So the key thing with Windows 8 is that Microsoft really sat down and tried to learn from what they knew already. Because remember, Microsoft had been one of the leaders in the tablet concept as far as leading down the path, just not getting market acceptance with their pen interfaces and the original touch interfaces they had going all the way back to Windows XP. Okay? But with Windows 8, they sat down and said, okay, what are the major gestures that are available? And the key thing for you as a developer, if you're in that category here, is that programming for touch is relatively straightforward with the modern implementation. So we have all the gestures we'd expect. So we have press and hold, tapping, slide to drag, swipe to select, pinch to zoom, rotate, and then swiping from edges to access command infrastructure. Okay? Those are all available to you through simple mechanisms. And then you see the basic interaction descriptions that are available, and this is from the documentation, just to give you that breakdown of what you need to think about if you're going to build a modern application that supports touch. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're doing touch is to think about your touch target, particularly about how people are going to go at it. But this is one of the problems when you try and use regular Windows, the desktop, with your finger, right? It goes to pop really quick, you know, when you try and sit there and touch and hold and do other types of gestures. This is why Microsoft had to create the modern, aka Metro interface, is that they needed something that was much more touch-friendly and that would support a higher percentage of tap success rate. And what you see here is, as the target size is smaller, right, the percentage of misses is way up. But as you make it larger, we start thinking about those tiles, right, you start seeing a much higher success rate. And that's the key, right? It's what we call fat finger syndrome, right? Making sure that it can be used for people of all different sizes. And that's one of the key things Microsoft did in Windows 8 and Windows 8.1 is that they made it so that the tile sizes are adjustable. So if you're working, for example, on a desktop on high resolution and you might not be touching it at all, you can get more information on the screen by switching things down. But when you switch to your tablet mode or other modes, you can use much larger items that are easier to touch and interact with. Okay, so let's switch over and I'm going to show you two touch demos. Okay. Oh, did I get it? No, I missed it. If you want to do it for me, thank you. And
No.
there we go. All right, so my password. Okay. And yes, it's complained about the screen resolution, but that's okay. Now, so the first thing is that I can swipe from the side and bring up the start screen. Right, we get the nice fluid flow and everything. And the key is the size of those touch targets, right? They're all of a reasonable size that I can easily touch to activate. Okay, Visual Studio, even though it's not particularly optimized for it, will yes, even let me do it. On the other hand, what Microsoft has tried to do with Office in their first stages, and hopefully this week we'll find out if we're getting a new version of Office for RT, aka for Metro, in that you can, if I bring up Excel for example, switch it to use touch mode. And what they've done is they've increased the size. So this goes back to that discussion I just had about the touch target. Making the items bigger to have greater success in what we're doing. So for example, I can come over here and I can click and make it bold very easily, right? Even my fat finger is able to interact with this, and I can come over here and access the menu items and the items on the screen very easily, okay? So this is kind of a hybrid approach that you can get into. That said, you got to watch this. This is kind of one of those things that seems like a good idea that ends up being an engineering nightmare. Microsoft has enhanced the core Windows APIs for desktop applications to support touch. In fact, their big initial push for this came in Windows 7. So if you're doing WPF, they do have support for touch interaction. The key thing to understand is that you're layering on top an experience that isn't optimized for it. Particularly if you're trying to solve a problem, we only want to have one application. What you'll typically find is that you need to get data about your users and find where they're spending their time. If they're spending their time with the keyboard and mouse, build a better optimized experience for that. Don't try to layer on touch for a super small percentage. Instead, what you'll see that one of the key things about touch-enabled apps, both on the iPad, Android, and Windows 8, is that they tend to be more isolated applications. They're optimized around a particular set of operations or snacking, to where we think about viewing report data or doing things like approval processes. If you look at a lot of the apps that are popular on all platforms, they're very focused at one particular thing. They're not these large monolithic applications with all these different features, like Excel, like Word, like Visual Studio, right? They tend to be focused, right? We have Twitter clients, we have email clients, right? Even Microsoft's mail and what we consider Outlook experiences are broken down amongst 3 different applications: the calendar application, the mail application, and the people application representing context. Although the people application is interesting in that it will aggregate data from multiple data sources. Okay, so keep that in mind when you see this and people say, well, I saw what they did with Excel, why can't we do that? Well, A, because it's a lot of hard work. B, it ends up becoming this thing where you're bifurcating your effort between 2 types of experiences, and to where you end up not really winning at either. Okay, so keep that in mind. We're not going to save. So this first sample comes from the SDK, and it's really about showing you all the input gestures. So let's run it, and then we'll just show you how easy it is to interact from a touch level. So the first thing you see here is the ability to draw. So in this black section here, I can draw. Okay, and this is, if you look up here, right there, where my mouse pointer is, we see that we're getting button events. Okay. Now you'll notice I'm doing it with 2 fingers. 3, 4, 5, and oh, bummer. So if you take a look at the application, it's been set to only handle 5 input points. Depending upon your device, if you have a new device, the typical number of points they recognize is 10 points. So you can do some really interesting stuff for interaction, particularly when you're doing things like everything from data input to touch interactions to things like drawing applications. Now, we go to the next one. This one's all about pointer capture and showing you how you can pick up, even with a mixed interface, the mouse pointer and the tracking information. Now here I'm touching, and we still get the pointer effect. So you can handle a distinct pointer event even though it's a touch experience. Now going further, the third experience is all about touch. So there's now events for these. If you look at pre-Windows 7, what you had to do is you had to handle basically mouse events and then do things like time how long the event was being held to consider it a tap event, etc. Now both at the low level, if you look at your WM_ messages in the Windows, we now have touch, and in the case of building XAML applications for the modern interface, aka Metro, or HTML5, or even C++, you have native events in that system, right? In Windows RT and in the modern experience. So if I tap, you can see I got to tap, double tap, press, hold, and lift. Okay, and that comes back as a right tapped event, so you get that as a distinct item. And then we have hold, that shows that I'm still holding, and then I let go. Okay, all those are very granular, broken down, and are going to be exposed, as you'll see, as very simple events. We also have support for more complex manipulations. You saw me drawing earlier with my fingers in that draw space. Here we see the ability to drag and move around based upon touch experiences. And then we can see as I use 2 fingers, I'm doing this right here. I can do rotation. I can do pinch and zoom, okay, like you would do with photos. All right. And all this works really straightforward. Yet even the keyboard is still something that's recognized so that you can track that in your modern applications, all with simple event implementations. And then I can take the app, come over here, and let it go. All right, so if we take a look at scenario 3 in particular, okay, and we'll scroll down. What you'll see here then is we have a various sets of events. We have a holding event. We have double tapped, right tapped, tapped. They're just events. And this is old school VB3, VB2 code behind, but you can also do a much richer model view, MVVM, model view model implementation, and do things like command processing also. The key is they're all just simple events that you respond to. So it's not hard to do touch from the programmatic standpoint. The only hard part is to think about the experience. And this is where Microsoft has created what they call the design language around what was called Metro, but they call it modern now, which is things around basic UI and layout. And the key thing around that when you start is that you can look at the templates that are available via File New Project and pick your language of choice, Visual Basic, C#, or yes, even Visual C++. And you can come in here and you'll see that there's a number of templates available. The Hub app is one that's new in Windows 8.1. The Split app, Grid app, and of course you can start blank. Now, when you take a look at this then, and you go to things like the Windows Store, we go to apps, let's see, how about Amazon? Don't allow. Right, notice the items on the screen, okay? They're going for that box metaphor. And then here they're cheating, right? What this is right here is, at the end of the day, is the web browser control that they're using, okay? So you gotta be careful about what you're creating. But if you look at this looks like it belongs here. Am I getting the sharing notes over there? Okay. And you can drill down and come and look at different items. But notice the larger touch points, right, that I can touch. Come look at the details. Okay, and then I can go over here and swipe to another app. Go back to the start screen. Now, here's what I want to show you, is network speed application. Because this doesn't follow any of those square boxy looks, but it is a touch optimized experience. Okay, I can swipe, I can come over here and look at the different items. There's not much to the interface, and that's my point about these data snack, or these snack type applications. Very simple, very focused around a particular task or set of tasks. Okay? Once again, I can swipe out and go forward. Now, the other sample app that I was going to show you from the SDK is the scroll viewer. And the key thing about this is this, it gives you the ability to use viewports to represent additional content when you don't have enough space. So this one is showing with snap points, and you can come over here with mandatory snap points, which forces the object to fit within a particular point. And then you can even do zooming within a particular area on the screen. Okay? So all the things you'd expect to be able to do in a modern application with touch is available and very easy to do, whether you use C#, C++, or God forbid you do it with HTML and JavaScript. Because honestly, if you're going to that much trouble, why don't you just embrace the web as it is? Because you can do touch with JavaScript on its own. Now, this week, just as a pointer, is a complicated week. There's actually 3 or 4 big shows all going on at once. Try that again. Yeah, it looks like it decided it didn't want to the first time. Obviously, we're here at DevWeek in London, but Build is going on and starts today in San Francisco. So if you're in any of this stuff related to Microsoft, you will want to take a look at the news headlines, and then next week, go to the public website for Channel 9, and you can take a look at watch talks that you weren't able to attend. But this is where we're supposed to hear things about the new version of Windows, the update for 8.1, as well as the scuttlebutt is, I'll be talking about Windows 9, aka Threshold. All right, any questions about touch? All right, so far so good? All right, so touch is probably the first thing we think about for NUI, but we're now starting to think about richer experiences. I know some of you were in my talk yesterday where I showed Iron Man UI, right? And one of the things in the Iron Man movies, particularly Iron Man 2, is Tony Stark has this great lab, and in this lab he has all the greatest, greatest and latest toys. In particular, he has gesture-based systems that allow him to wave his hands and magic happens. Well, the cool thing about that is we're not that far off from being able to build those type of systems today. And what I'm going to show you is some of it that we can do with Kinect. Now, Kinect is Microsoft's sensor for doing NUI. It originally came out with the Xbox 360 as an add-on. It is now available, as you can see here, as a device you can buy for Windows. And we'll talk about what's coming later. So we're going to go through and talk about getting started with the sensor, set up your development environment, how you connect to Kinect, accessing the camera, doing skeletal tracking, working with audio, as well as the future. So the cool thing about this sensor is it's available now for about £200. I checked just by looking at amazon.co.uk, and you can have one delivered tomorrow. So get out your corporate card. And look, we're going to have NUI. Once again, just like touch, you need to have the correct application for the technology to make it make sense. Now, the way it works, as you can see, is that it has a power source here. Actually, I'm connected to cables, but if you take a look over here, it's got a simple power brick, and then it has this cable, which then plugs into another cable here with a special adapter, and then plugs into a USB port. In this case, it only needs USB 2.0. Now, when you first get it out of the box, there's no CD, nothing else. You just plug it into a modern version of Windows, aka Windows 7 or Windows 8X, and it will recognize it. It does require x86, x64. It doesn't support the RT systems as of this time. Now, we look at the Kinect as a single unit. We call it the Kinect sensor. But if you take a look, it's actually got multiple sensors inside. It has an IR emitter, a color sensor, an IR depth sensor, a tilt motor, as well as a microphone array to capture voice and sound input. So things like the IR emitter and the IR depth sensor are what we're going to use to interact visually, to do our gestures and have it recognize us and our various points on our body. The color sensor is what is used to actually capture a camera and let you do video. And then you have the tilt motor to adjust the basic level of it. Now, the key thing about the tilt motor, if you take a look at the SDK and docs, it's not something that's supposed to be, moving all the time. So you don't want to have it, for example, constantly moving back and forth like a pan and tilt camera for monitoring. It's not designed for that. It will probably break, is what they're getting at. Now, to get started with it, acquire the Kinect device, and then you need a modern version of Visual Studio. You can use Visual Studio 2012 as well as Visual Studio 2013. And yes, you can even use the free Express editions. So it's a very low barrier to entry. Once you have Visual Studio installed, you need to download and install the Kinect for Windows SDK, as well as you're going to want the developer sample kit. Everything is available from the Kinect for Windows homepage. The current SDK is version 1.8, and each release, they released 4 different SDKs from the beginning, and they kind of did this magic jumping. I think what they thought is they were going to go from 1 to 1.5 to 2, and then they went 1.5 and said, no, let's do kind of 6, 7, and then 8 is what they've done at this point. In either case, you download these puppy dogs, get them installed, and then you'll be ready to go. Now, when it installs, what you'll see is it installs a number of things. It installs the Kinect for Windows drivers, and in fact, what's interesting is when you plug in the Kinect before you put the SDK down, Windows just sees it as a video and audio device. In fact, you can use the regular built-in Windows sound recorder to use the microphone array. That said, installing the SDK drivers lets you have access to all the rich stuff. And that's the key to understand if you build a Connect for Windows application. There is a runtime pack that you install with your application so that it has full access to the Connect. If you take a look here, then we have the SDK, and then notice I also installed the developer toolkit. We see we get some other speech recognition kits. Microsoft over the years has flirted with and had affairs with speech recognition technology, both on the client and the server. And Connect is their next round at doing this. The other thing that's not on here that I'll mention that you'll want to consider installing is language packs. I, of course, have the EOS English installed. It turns out, though, for fun, I installed the British one to see if it responds to that. We'll have fun with that in a moment. But in either case, you use the appropriate language pack to recognize. Now, for English, obviously, there's subtleties in the way we all pronounce this same mother tongue. But obviously, it's more interesting when you start thinking about non-English languages as being more complex than a derivative of that. There are a number of languages supported. I think they're up to 8 or 11. I forget the number. But that is a constant process that they're working on. Now, how do you connect to Connect? Well, they really tried to open it up to everybody on Windows. Today it is a native technology. So you're either going to use managed code, VB, C#, or you're going to use C++. You can't use it with a Metro, a modern app, yet. Now there are some things you could do to get around that, but that basically involves using the new Connect network interfaces to where you would talk to a service that in turn would talk to the Connect. That said, one thing that Microsoft has done out of under the guise of protecting the users from bad code is by default you're not allowed to have a modern app talk back to the host machine because they're kept sandboxed. There are ways to do it, but that kind of app would never get published in the store. So you could do it for your own corporate apps, but you wouldn't be able to put it in the store, at least yet. Hopefully that's something they're going to change. I've been having lots of conversations with Microsoft about this because it's really limiting some of the apps we can build for people. In either case, if you know C#, VB.NET, or C++, you have a home here. My C++ skills generally make things blow up, so I'm going to be sticking to C#. Now, the key to understand is you have the base level SDK, and then there are a number of toolkits that come with the developer samples. And you're going to find those toolkits are invaluable, particularly because they will let you build Connect applications very quickly and easily without getting down to the low-level interfaces. And I'll describe examples of that later. I'm going to stick, of course, to the simple ones because it's a talk and they're demos. The point is, understand that while you have this high-level interface, just like with anything else, you'll have the ability to jump down to the very low level to where you actually can deal with individual pixels coming back from the sensor, to deal with streams of data from the Connect device. Okay, so once again, it just depends on your needs. And the final thing to do is make sure you review the design guidelines document. This is a very nice document that they created here. And if you take a look, it's 142 pages, but it's got lots of detailed information about both the device and how to design applications for it. Right? In fact, Microsoft and I both stole judiciously from here to get some nice images, as you'll see later in my slides. But in either case, this is on the home page. So when you go to download, if we go back to that URL, here. There we go. If you come down here and download the SDK, you'll see that right there is the human interface guidelines, and you'll see right there under the essential, those three things are all listed there as links. Okay, and you'll see, for example, language packs, as I mentioned, are available here, and I have a link later in the slides for this also. All right. So, what's it going to take to get started? Well, it's really pretty straightforward. First of all, you create your application. When I say create your app, WPF, Windows Forms are probably the two most common things you're going to do. Okay. That said, you could do something, if you're creative with a service as well as some other type of experience, particularly if you're trying to use the Connect more as a device that's monitoring as opposed to being interacted with. That said, that's not really what these are for. Right? These are expensive cameras. They're not designed just for that. You need to reference the SDK and possible support projects. So there is one main Connect DLL you reference, and then from there you can add additional libraries. And then what you basically do is you need to manage the connected state. First of all, make sure the device exists. And the cool thing about this is that you can use more than one Connect on a system at a time. And your code can then distinguish and pick different Connect devices. This is how you would simulate or create the Tony Stark lab. Right? The whole key thing about the way his lab works is he's in this confined environment that obviously has multiple sensors being able to see what he's doing to monitor his gestures, and then he has the luxury of also having cool holographic projection that he can interact with, right? He can do things like this, and he can actually see something. If you're in my talk yesterday, that stuff is coming, right? I showed one of this very cool 3D holographic fireplace that a company has available. And it looks 100% real. It's amazing. Now, granted, it's confined to a small area as opposed to a full-size room, but it's where we're going. And if you do poke around online, there are companies, the Germans have done some amazing stuff on full-room holographic projection, right? We're not at the hologram or holodeck stage of Star Trek, or even if you think about the way the TARDIS works, right, when you come inside of this space. We're not there yet, but we are making progress towards that type of stuff. So you make sure the device exists, enable a specific sensor feature, and that's the key thing about all the demos, right? We're going to do audio sensors. We're going to do the camera. We're going to do skeletal tracking. We can even do face tracking. And then you start the Connect. And just like, when your mother said you take it out, you put it up, when you start the connection, you should stop it, right? Because only one app can control a Connect at a time. Now, once you've got it started, then you get data via either the interaction controls, which is what I'm going to be using mostly, which is the easiest way to do it. You can then step down and hook into low-level events. And finally, you can actually go into polling and actually, as I said, deal at very low level to the point of individual pixels. The key thing about the camera experience, as you're going to see, is that it is actually sending pixel data to you. It is not sending a video stream. It operates at up to 640 by 480 today, and it sends you 30 frames, up to 30 frames a second is how it's giving you that image, okay? Now, let's look at camera basics. So, as I mentioned, what happens here is you're getting this image data in the form of a BGR 32-bit format, which means there's basically 4 different bytes that are available, each one representing a color, and then there's an empty one, which traditionally is used for alpha channels, okay? The cool thing is, once you have the image, you can then use that and do things and add your own transparency layer to the image if you want to. In either case, there are 3 sizes supported for this image data: 80 by 60, 320 by 240, and, as I said, 640 by 40. That's the limit on this Generation 1 device, okay? Now, the DPI is 96, and you get what's called a stride, which is basically the way the images come in and how you get processed. So basically, this would represent the first pixel. Then this is the second pixel, and you're actually having access to that. The SDK and the toolkits will let you work with the entire frame and then work with the input data as if it was a video stream, so you don't have to sit there and care about that if you don't want to. But the cool thing is that you have this low-level data to do very rich levels of interaction with the person on the other end of the Connect. All right, so let's take a look at how we get started. So first we'll bring this over. Now, if you have a Connect with your Xbox, you can get it to work with your PC. That said, the benefit of the Connect for Windows is that it's explicitly designed for commercial use, whereas if you do it with your Xbox Connect sensor, it's not licensed for that. The other thing to be aware of is that the Connect for Windows sensor in this first generation is a little better, and it supports what's called near mode, in that it can work with me at this close level on the desk. Whereas traditionally, when they first created it, it was meant for room interaction for playing games. Okay, so keep that in mind. So you're really going to want this one. All right, so we'll go over here to Visual Studio, and let's go open up the first project. And I'm actually going to start here. Okay, so the first thing to look at is my solution. There are 2 projects in there. The first one is Camera Fundamentals, which is the app, And then there's a second project called Microsoft Samples.connect.wpf viewers. So this is a WPF application. The viewer is going to provide us with a little bit of extra help to process the input data from the camera. That out of the way. And then if we go and look at the project itself and look at references, it's of course referencing that project, but notice it also has a reference to the Microsoft.connect assembly. Okay. So that's what we need to get going, and we'll first run it. And we'll give it a second. And there we go. Now you may have seen something flash on the screen. Let me show you what that was. I'm going to unplug my Connect. And what you see here is that we have this control that we're using to detect if there's a Connect available. And if I had more than one Connect, I would be able to choose which one I wanted to use. Okay? Now the key is when I plug it back in, you'll see initializing. And all set. Back to me. Maybe I did rehook it up. I can't remember if I did this. The problem is I created two different versions of this. And so my other one, I think. Yes, this one. Okay, so this is a previous version of the same app using the newer version. Notice that the little sensor came up there, and I picked the wrong one. This will go away. Question mark, no longer there. Plug it back in. It's initializing. There we go. And there we go. Okay. There we go. Picked the wrong one. But in either case, same basic concept is going on. We have this control that lets us hook up to the Connect, and then we're able to get the video feed information. And here I'm using the camera. Behind the scenes, it's still gathering the other data for the depth, etc. Well, how does this all work? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Here. Bigger. Okay. So if we take a look, we've hooked up the chooser control. Now, one thing I have to tell you, you will find one of the pains about Microsoft's evolution is that samples out there have been built against different versions of the SDK, and particularly some of the stuff that I got from Microsoft. And so depending upon the version you're using it against, you might see a different toolkit. For example, the chooser control in the latest version is part of the Microsoft.connect.toolkit. Whereas I showed you the previous sample that I opened, it was in a completely different project type. So this one has moved. The other one is still valuable and has lots of really good stuff. But just be aware of this, and I apologize for the confusion there. In either case, the chooser has a Connect change event that we hook into, and then we have the chooser control that we bind to that particular control on the screen. And then what we do is come over here to the sensor change, and basically we go through and we check to see whether or not the sensor is our old or new sensor. And then if we have an old sensor that we've been hooked up before, like I was, we let go of that object and hook up to the new one. And the new one we just hook into the new sensor all frames ready event handler. So all frames ready lets you know that the camera is available to produce data, and it's up to you to care about the data you want. In this case, when you want the camera, you're working with what's called the color stream. And the color stream, you tell it what kind of data you want. We're telling you we want a RGB 640x40, 30 frames per second. Okay? Then you'll notice we're using Coding for Fun Connect.wpf writable bitmap helper. Once again, you can work with the Connect at a very low level, down to the pixel, or there's these different abstractions. And one of them is part of the Coding for Fun library that's available on CodePlex. The entire source code is available to you. It's available in packages for WPF and Windows forms, in NuGet form, or you can just download the DLL. So it's available in 3 different ways. The key thing about getting the source code is there's lots of good stuff you really want to get into Connect programming, if you're not just going to do it as a hobby. And you might want the source code because they're not always up to date. In fact, they haven't published a 1.8 version of the library. So what I did is I took down the source code, I compiled it, and updated it to make sure it was copacetic. There's only some minor changes, but once again, if you want to have things from different libraries, you want them to be using the same base Connect DLL. So you're referencing the Connect DLL 1.8. If you get the one out of NuGet, it's going to reference 1.7, and Visual Studio will complain, and you'll get compiler warnings. In general, it'll still work, but occasionally it'll run into little things won't behave right. Particularly if you're doing stuff with the depth, low-level depth code. And then once we get this color bitmap, we feed it to the image source. So basically, every time there's a frame that's ready, this event's firing, and we're taking the data that's coming from Connect, collecting it, and displaying it as if it was a video stream. Okay? And then we come down here, and in the window of closing, we say stop. Okay? All right, so I'm going to open up one of the other samples here. And we go here to SDK. No, that was the wrong folder. Samples, connector windows. There we go. Now, this one's really simple and just shows you how you can adjust the tilt. And right now it's got a current angle of 15. I'm going to tell it to go all the way up to 25, 26. And you probably all can't see it, but it is moving. And the whole point is mostly just to show you that it can. Okay? So, not very interesting, not very sexy, but it works just fine. All right. All right. So, to review the basic, how it didn't stay on that slide, I don't know. When you're working with the camera, really straightforward. Just need to reference the Connect DLL at a minimum. Choose how you're going to display the data. If you want to do it the hard way, there's other code samples you can look at for that. If you want to do it the easy way, all you need to do is use the Coding for Fun library, take the bitmap data, and just put it into a WPF image control. That's all that was in the XAML, was just an image control if it wasn't obvious. All right, audio. This is probably one of my favorite things. I actually like this a little better than gesturing because I like this whole idea of being able to talk to my computer. You know, I mentioned yesterday that the way this stuff is evolving, we're really seeing a combination of local technology backed by large cloud-based services. Siri from Apple. Microsoft supposedly is going to announce Cortana this week at TechEd. They also have a system available through Bing that you can use. And then Google has their Google Play system that lets you do Google OK with Google Glass as well as with their Android devices. The key thing for all these things is that you do not have to build what we're going to do here, which is a grammar library, a set of commands that are recognized by your system. Okay? So Connect out of the box lets you do local processing. Hooking into a backend right now, unfortunately, other than Bing, right, there's not a lot of access to things like Siri and the bigger systems. In fact, right now, Siri's not even really open to Apple developers. It's still something that is localized just to the Apple Corporation as opposed to developers on their platform. So it is really nice that we can build applications on Connect using audio. So, first thing to understand is that we have that microphone array. And we've got two different pieces of data here. First of all, our sound source angle, where we can figure out where it thinks the sound's coming from, and is that the sound we care about. In addition, you can use the tilt motor as well as the physical positioning to control where it's gathering data, so the directional microphone input. And so you get this basic 50-degree range from either side from the center of the device. Now, what's interesting about using the Connect device is you can record both your data streams as well as your audio streams and save those out to files, okay? And you can use echo cancellation if you don't want to capture your PC sound, right? So if you have sound coming out like game data, etc., you can ignore that. When you start thinking about speech recognition, on the other hand, you got to think about how you're going to respond to things. And the way we do this is you build what's called a grammar. You use a grammar builder to provide a set of known phrases and the language that it can be recognized in. And then based upon what Connect thinks it found, and you basically can weight the value based upon what's come down and how accurate you think it is, you can process that command and do whatever you want. And then you also want to ensure that automatic gain control is turned on. Right? Automatic gain control you turn on when you want to record audio and you want to get the best audio sound. What we're not so concerned about is best feedback audio. We're cared about the waveform that's coming in to try and accurately determine what is being said. Okay? Now, when you want to build a grammar, it's simply a matter of accessing the grammar object and providing it with those appropriate phrases. Now, here's a simple example of providing different choices for saying yes. Yes, please, yes, yeah, okay. Now, you can see this is why the cloud is where they're really moving for these type of things, because doing an application to do natural language understanding with a grammar is not going to work. It's not going to scale, right? Just with English language, right, you need the Oxford English Dictionary to cover everything. And even then, right, you have to deal with all things like pronunciation. So keep that in mind when you start playing with this. Now, the first thing I want to show you is actually a built-in application in conjunction with a demo app. So this is a very simple app that does audio recording. And so if we go look at the code, we'll see that in the window loaded, we're coming in here and hooking up the sensor changed event. And in the sensor changed event, we're once again checking for that old new value. And here we're using the audio source. So the audio source is how we get access to the sound array if we want to record it. So if we then run it, you're going to see it's a tour de force of UI design. So it's loading up. Tell it how long we want to record. Press record. Hello, I'm doing a talk on Connect. Okay? So it's that simple, and it's something you have access to. Now, if I come over here, there's an application that gets installed called Connect Studio. And Connect Studio is really cool in that it latches on to a running application and lets you monitor all the various input streams from the sensor and then record or save those, as well as do post-analysis. So you can actually record a section and see what the data looks like. So you're thinking about, for example, programming the low-level bitmap objects, or you're working with the skeletal data. You can actually have a repeatable set of input data to work against. So when you fire it up, it says, what app do you want to connect to? And we see that. You can see I'm getting depth data there. For whatever reason, the color view is not picking up right. Okay. And then you've got this, so if you run it, it'll sit there and record what's going on as you go through. It saves out a specialized file format. Watch how they can get very big. Microsoft gave us some samples for the new version of the SDK, and they're like gigabytes in size. So lots of data can be captured over a session period. Now, let's go one step further. And no, I'm not going through source control. And I keep picking that because I'm still running. Stop debugging. Go. And now, let's do some speech recognition. So give it a second to initialize. All right. So as I talk, notice that it's looking for different words. You can see, hypothesize, it's going through my grammar to see if it's recognizing any words that I'm saying. And so far I haven't said any words that it recognizes. Now, as I talk, notice as I move, the blue line will kind of try and figure out where I'm talking from. And if I come over here, you can see it's picking up my movement and the direction it's coming from. So you have this data to figure out, is this who you care about? I'm sorry, what was your name again? Aiden. So Aiden, oh, I think we got a bug. Yep. Oh, I said something. I said the magic word. So Aiden, once it comes up, say one of the colors you see on the screen in a moment.
Blue. Asks are not in the range. Red.
So there you go. And if I turn around here, now see I'm talking, I'm closer to it, I'm louder. Green. Okay, so it's even able to pick that up. And you see, based upon the data it gets and the word it picks up, whether it fits that range. Now, if you've ever used the new, if you use Xbox One with the Kinect device, they have a command initiator that kind of says, hey, I'm talking to you so that you care. Like right now, I'm just talking right, it's going crazy, right? It's like, ah. So you can use that as a keyword to actually tell it that you don't want to listen. So red, I'll see it rejected it because it couldn't really tell. Red, green, blue, Jarvis. Ah, so you can do stuff like that. Camera on. And there you go. Turn the camera on. Camera off. Okay. So with those phrases, even the way I pronounced it, it got a 90 percentile hit and said that is what I was talking about. Camera doodad. Okay, it heard part of it, but didn't hear the rest of that it needed to do it. And finally, exit. Exit. That's just like my one at home. Xbox One. Turn off. It won't. Okay? So, how does this work? Well, whoops. So I did the wrong keystroke, that's why. Okay, so some of this is just very basic WPF stuff. We got brushes here for drawing and stuff. The routable bitmap to show what's on the screen. But if we come down here, one of the key things is the sensor changed event where we set things up and we initialize the connect. And you'll notice one of the first things we do here is create the speech recognizer. Now, when we create the speech recognizer, one of the things that will happen is that we'll get the opportunity to provide it with the language that we understand. And here's where we specify whether we want an invariant or we'll take any language, and then we're writing specialized understanding for our language of choice, in this case, ENUS. Now, if I do something like FR, which is French, France, and run the application, we're going to see an error because it's going to say, hey, you've asked for a language that's not installed in the system. On the other hand, if I change it to EN, yes, I know. Thank you. This will work because I installed the UK pack, or technically the NGB pack. So if we take a look, it is a very small download. And that's about 17 meg. And so this is the language pack for ENGB. And as I said, there's other ones. There's a German one, there's a French one. Like I said, there's like 8 or 11 of them at this point. So by having that pack installed, you'll then be able to tell the recognizer to deal with both pronunciation as well as dialect when you're trying to evaluate the words that you put into your grammar. Now, once you've got that set up, then you come down a little further, get things initialized. That's updating the UI. Come down a little further after we've got the mess, to initialize. And here's where we're setting up the grammar. Naturally, hard coding, not the best way to build it, but you get the idea for demoware. You're going to want to have some data source file that has your grammar. Instantiate the grammar builder, pass in the culture using, append it, and then hook in the various events. And you'll notice that there's 3 events we're using: recognized, hypothesized, and recognition rejected. If you come down here, we're basically looking at the items that we're getting back and checking the confidence level of how it fits in the range. So it's very basically just a numeric scale that we evaluate to see if it's within our tolerance. It turns out this is where you do your testing with your users, the way they speak. Obviously, in as small a country as the UK is in land size, you guys are rich with dialect and pronunciation variances. Throw a little beer into it, and it gets even more different. I remember doing a class down in Goodwood Park, and a wide range of people came in from all over the country, and there was this nice young lady from Scotland, Glasgow of all places. Spoke very well, very light Scottish accent, right? Get a few pints in her, and boy, it completely changed, where she sounded like the taxi driver I took to the airport. Just completely different, right? So obviously, knowing your target audience is going to affect how you set the level. And as you can see here, in the case of the colors, for most of them, we just are changing the color. In the case of camera on, though, we simply process the command. So very simple structure. It's all about evaluating the input data, making sure that you're processing the appropriate grammar, and then doing the appropriate commands. In the case of Jarvis, right, I can use it as a keyword. And you can build upon this to where it's the first word said, break down into the sentence. You can crack open what the commands you get. And then ultimately, in this case, for exit, I just shut down the application. All right, cool stuff. Now, skeletal tracking allows us to recognize a human in the space of the connect, and then to narrow it down to different parts of the person's body, depending upon whether they're standing or sitting. Is it really 3 minutes to go?
Yeah.
No, I got way more demos. Crap. Okay. Darn it. I was doing it leisurely, an hour and a half, plenty of time. Okay. First of all, the current sensor, you can detect a maximum of 2 skeletons and 6 people. For the other people, the other 4, you're basically just detecting their hip center, which is the dot you see there. And then from there, once you have a person, there are 20 different locations on the body you can recognize. Distance from the camera is going to affect what you can see. You can track the things that affect smoothing. One of the big things you'll notice here is that you can guess whether there's something at a particular location based upon how much data you do have. So for example, if I find the elbow, I can guess where the hand might be if I'm trying to track that. You got to think about your interaction zones in that after a while, certain things will fatigue people and will make them unhappy unless it's an exercise application. So we can actually use the scale to say, look, even though I'm in this small range, it goes out to this area and recognize that. So this demo, oops, wrong place. Now this demo is meant to work in conjunction with a Philips Hue, but getting that into the suitcase and getting on board the plane wasn't going to work very well. All right, so what we're going to do here is start this. I'll give it a second. Now the color of bars basically mean if I were to touch them, it would have changed the lights on the hue. So we'll give it a second to initialize. And those 2 circles, once it finds it, is going to represent my hands. So notice as I move, right? Oh, cool. And then if I go up here, oh, almost there. And basically, if you look at the code, I'm able to change the color of what's going on. And if you play with it, you can adjust it, because right now you notice these are like glued to my hand, but it's kind of jerky a little bit. Well, you can turn on things like smoothing to control, and you can get more of a yo-yo effect, etc. And it's telling me I'm done, so I'm going to be in trouble here now. But you can take a look at this. Let me just show you the other sample real quick that is interesting. Is we can also do face tracking. And I got to stop this application. Stop it. If I knew how to use Visual Studio, that'd be awesome. Okay, this one, give it a second to initialize. And what you can do with this SDK is you can basically trap onto the face and read things like even mouth, etc. So we'll give it a second to initialize. Obviously, I've got it a little low for this demo. Give it a second, come on, there we go. Okay, so what is Brian thinking? Am I happy? Yes. Yes. Come on. No, I'm not. There we go, I'm not happy. Okay, and then if we go and turn on a little extra stuff here, you can actually get to that little face up. So there's the nodding, but if I go for broke up here, we can do animation units and really get down to the good stuff. Okay, let's see if we get that thought bubble to come on. Okay, come on, give me the bubble. There we go. Okay. So we got the nod. Let's see. Oh, wait. So it's actually detecting me opening my mouth and then the eyebrows. Okay. You guys can take a look at that. And I did want to show you the gesture one, and then I'll flip to the slides. Just give me 2 more minutes. I apologize for keeping you over. And for gestures, you saw me doing the hand motion stuff, but you can also do something richer. Now this one's loading data from TechEd. It's loading a catalog of data and showing you how you can take a traditional user interface and add gesture around it. And you can think about this for things like shopping applications. So you see the sensor there. And actually it might work just fine if I said one, my far like that. There we go. So you can see I've got my hand, and these are WPF controls. And then if I come over here, I can scroll, and it recognizes my hand, and I can get inertia. And then if I want something like Agile Software Development with ALM, I can push and have it respond and open up. So you can see, really, you're only limited by your imagination and getting to know the device in your environment. So gestures interaction, these are new as the 1.7 SDK. It lets you specify an area of the screen that the hand works with. You notice that it only went to that scroll at the top. They automatically draw the hands for you, etc. Shows you face tracking. You can do roll, yaw, pitch, as well as these animation units, and do things like lips, eyebrows, etc. Really interesting stuff you think about responding to what users are doing. The future. So I've actually got one of these, but once again, Her Majesty's government doesn't always like me doing a bunch of hardware unless I file a bunch of paperwork. I've gotten shouted at. So this one fit in. This one I wasn't going to show you because most of you can't get it yet. New sensor, new active infrared. This is the same sensor that comes with Xbox One. Full HD video input. Big jump there. You're going to be able to interact with 6 skeletons. Is what the cool thing. You actually can recognize and deal with them at the same time. And improve voice recognition. It is in preview right now. I'm expecting announcements this week at Build, hopefully. There's a new SDK for this, for all this good stuff. The future is now. Think about your design up front, right? NUI doesn't always mean good user experience, right? You really got to think about how it fits into your application. But it is where we're going to where we have these different mechanisms of interacting with larger systems. And the key thing to remember is it's a core design principle. You don't just bolt it on after the fact. As you can see from just those simple demos, you're going to have to think about the model. How do people interact with not only the system, or the devices, excuse me, but ultimately the system underneath it, the data, what they're trying to do. Special thanks to Microsoft and Dan Fernandez and Microsoft for images, code samples, and guidance. I couldn't have done this without them. A lot of the stuff, Dan gets paid to do this. He's got one of the best jobs ever. He's in charge of the Coding for Fun group. He wrote a lot of the samples, as well as some from the team. And he did a lot of these at a talk at TechEd. I'll provide links to all that stuff, as well as I took some of these versions and made sure they work with the latest SDK. So you can have lots of fun with that. Beyond that, thank you for coming to my talk. I'll be doing a talk this afternoon as well as tomorrow, so if you want to ask me questions, you can stay now. Go have coffee, tea, whatever's going on at this point. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you very much.